She was bright, kind-hearted, and full of dreams. A young girl with a future as vivid as her paintings. But one spring evening in 1975, everything changed. She vanished just a few blocks from home, and what followed became one of Canada's most haunting mysteries. This is not just the story of a crime, it's the story of a mother's relentless fight for justice, a town gripped by fear, and a case that would take nearly 5 decades to solve. This is the story of Sharron Prior. Montreal, March 29, 1975. Easter was just around the corner, and 16-year-old Sharron Prior was preparing for the celebrations with her family, painting eggs, helping with dinner, laughing with friends. It was a day like any other in her quiet neighborhood. But that night, Sharron stepped out to meet friends at the local pizzeria and never made it. The events that unfolded would leave a family shattered, a community in shock, and investigators chasing shadows. What really happened that night? Who was the man that took her? And why did it take nearly 50 years to find the truth? Let's go back to the beginning, to who Sharron was, what made her special, and how her disappearance became a turning point in Canadian criminal history. Sharron Prior was born on February 9, 1959, in Montreal, Canada. Her mother, Yvonne Prior, originally from the UK, immigrated to Canada with her family when she was very young. Yvonne lived her entire life in Canada, where she met her future husband, George, a serviceman. The couple fell in love, got married, and later welcomed their daughter, Sharron. Just before Sharron's second birthday, Yvonne gave birth to twin girls, Doreen and Maureen, in 1962. Later, she had a son, who became the youngest in the family. In 1965, George was stationed elsewhere, which eventually led to their decision to divorce. While George continued his military career and moved frequently, Yvonne settled with her children in an apartment in Lang, Canada, provided through a program for military families. This quiet and cozy place seemed perfect for raising her children. Yvonne believed she had found a safe and stable home for her family, unaware that danger could still lurk even in peaceful neighborhoods. From a young age, Sharron was known for being gentle, beautiful, and compassionate. She was responsible, sincere, and kind, often helping those in need. Her caring nature led her to rescue homeless animals, especially those that were sick or injured. This deep compassion inspired her dream of becoming a veterinarian in the future. As she grew older, Sharron joined a school club and began playing hockey. She was also very creative, dedicating her free time to art clubs and needlework classes. With her many talents, Sharron seemed to have a bright future ahead. Yvonne was thrilled to see her daughter blossom into such a wonderful young woman. As her daughter's greatest supporter, Yvonne was naturally protective and tried to shield Sharron from negative influences. Sadly, this caution was not enough to protect her from a cruel man who would later enter her life. At 16, Sharron was a typical teenage girl facing everyday adolescent challenges. She loved the music of the time and explored new hobbies, some of which her parents didn't always approve of. During this time, she met a young man named John, who had admired her since the 4th grade. Eventually, they began dating, supported by their group of friends. They were seen as a close and loving couple. Sharron's parents, seeing the mutual affection, supported their relationship. According to Yvonne, their relationship was harmonious, free of conflict, and surrounded by good people. Yet even this supportive environment couldn't protect her from what would happen next. On March 29, 1975, everything seemed normal. Sharron woke up and had breakfast. Her mother had gone out to run errands, shopping the day before Easter to buy food and gifts for the children. When she returned, Sharron, the eldest, helped her unpack the groceries. It was meant to be a special day for the family. Yvonne's boyfriend and his son, Stephen, along with some friends, were planning to visit. Sharron spent most of the day painting Easter eggs and preparing for the holiday. Stephen arrived early and played with her younger brother. Later, Sharron got ready to go with Stephen to a sports and crafts association where they were both members. Sharron was going there to receive a special coat called the Garrow Jacket, named after the brother of the organization's founder who had died of leukemia. This jacket symbolized membership, but it wasn't given out freely. Children had to earn it, for example, by selling lottery tickets. Sharron had worked hard and sold enough tickets to qualify. She was excited to finally receive her personalized jacket. Unfortunately, when she arrived, they didn't have her size available. Disappointed, Sharron returned home empty-handed with Stephen, planning to come back another day to collect her jacket. Despite her disappointment, Sharron maintained a festive spirit. She joined her mother and her mother's boyfriend in helping with the final preparations for the gathering. Once the guests arrived, Sharron and her mother hid Easter eggs for the children to find later. Afterward, Sharron asked for permission to go to Marina, a local pizzeria popular among teenagers. Since it was close to home, her mother often allowed her to go there with friends, and this time was no different. After receiving permission, Sharron went to her room to get ready. As she was about to leave, the girl next door stopped by for a quick visit. Everyone chatted while Sharron got dressed. She borrowed one of her mother's sweaters and put on her favorite suede jacket. Around 7 p.m., Sharron and her neighbor stepped out of the house. However, her neighbor decided not to go after all and headed back home, while Sharron continued on her own to meet friends at the pizzeria. A group of teenagers was already at Marina waiting for Sharron, but she never showed up on time. At first, they assumed she was just late, perhaps spending time with her boyfriend, John, so they didn't worry, and continued their evening as usual. At that time, several employees from a local company were watching a hockey match at home. After the game ended, they made their way to the pizzeria. Among them was John, Sharron's boyfriend, who was surprised not to find her there. Like the others, he had assumed she would already be at Marina, and her absence concerned him, as Sharron was usually very punctual. Meanwhile, back at home, Yvonne was putting the younger children to bed and watching TV. She decided to wait a little longer, thinking Sharron had perhaps lost track of time while hanging out with friends and would return soon. She remained in the living room so she wouldn't miss Sharron's arrival, but hours passed, and there was still no sign of her daughter. By around 1 a.m., fear began to overwhelm Yvonne. It was too late to call any of Sharron's friends, so all she could do was wait and occasionally glance out the window, hoping to see her daughter return. As dawn approached, Yvonne started calling Sharron's friends one by one. To her dismay, none of them had seen Sharron, and even John had no idea where she was. Most concerning of all, they confirmed that Sharron had never arrived at the pizzeria that night. The girl next door confirmed she had said goodbye to Sharron on the street, but hadn't seen her since. When Yvonne spoke to Mary, Sharron's best friend, her anxiety only deepened. Mary told her that around 7 p.m., near the pizzeria, a 20-year-old woman named Cheryl Roy had been attacked by a man with a knife. Fortunately, passers-by heard Cheryl's screams and scared the attacker away before he could do further harm. Witnesses described the man as tall, with dark hair, blue eyes, and a mustache. He spoke calmly and was wearing a ski jacket, blue jeans, and pointed-toe shoes. The man had fled in the same direction Sharron would have taken to get to Marina. Upon hearing this, Yvonne panicked. The timing and location of the attack matched Sharron's route. She reported everything to the police, who did not immediately make any arrests, but instead launched a full-scale search for Sharron. Hundreds of people soon learned about the incident and joined the search for the missing 16-year-old schoolgirl. Volunteers were given her photo and description to aid in the search. Yvonne appeared on television, appealing to the public for help and asking anyone with information to contact the police. Sadly, despite the massive efforts, no new leads emerged. Days passed with no updates on Sharron's whereabouts. Still, her mother continued to hold on to hope. Sharron had no reason to run away. She had a strong relationship with her parents and was dating a kind boy from school. Their relationship was based on love and mutual respect, and he didn't seem like someone who would hurt her. Sharron also stayed away from troublemakers and had no known enemies. Her disappearance left the police baffled. They had no clear suspects and no motive. Attempts to track down the man with the knife were unsuccessful. The investigation stalled, and despite her heartbreak, Yvonne refused to give up hope for her daughter's safe return. On April 1st, around 6 a.m., Sharron's mother, Yvonne, noticed something strange outside her window. A familiar young man was leaving her house and crossing the street to pick up a newspaper from her doorstep. Sensing something was off, she called out to him, asking why he was out so early and collecting newspapers from house to house. He didn't answer, and instead quickened his pace to leave. Yvonne rushed outside and caught up with him. He tried to keep the newspaper, but she managed to snatch it away. He shouted for her not to look, but she did. On the front page, she was confronted with a heartbreaking image: the body of a girl found in the snow. The incident had occurred in the suburbs, just a few minutes' drive from their home. Not only was Yvonne shocked by the news, but also by the fact that the police hadn't informed her, even though they should have. Many of her neighbors had already seen the story in the newspaper before she had. She convinced herself that the body couldn't be Sharron, but rather another girl who happened to look like her daughter. After gathering herself, Yvonne called the police to dispute the frightening headline. The detectives told her that they had not yet confirmed the identity of the victim, which only deepened her fear. Feeling overwhelmed, she asked Sharron's father, George, to come help, as she was in shock. The girl in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to Sharron and was wearing the exact clothes Yvonne had described. When George arrived, he confirmed their worst fears. It was indeed their daughter. The 16-year-old schoolgirl had been found dead. A local resident named Jacques, who had read about Sharron's disappearance in the newspaper, had discovered the body. When he realized the girl resembled the missing teen, he immediately alerted the authorities. Jacques was usually careful to lock all the doors in his house. But on that Tuesday morning, he noticed one of the locks had been tampered with, and the door was left unlocked. There were no signs of forced entry, almost as if someone had a key. Yet, Jacques was the only one with full access to the house. When he walked outside into the driveway, he was horrified to find the body of a woman lying there, naked from the waist down. Nothing was missing from his home. He couldn't understand why the body had been left on his property. Police soon arrived and launched a murder investigation. It was immediately clear that the crime was brutal. Sharron had suffered multiple signs of abuse, including bruises and hematomas. She was wearing only her suede jacket and a blue sweater. Her jeans were found several meters away, and her underwear was caught on a nearby tree. Her mouth had been tightly taped, with the tape tangled in her hair. Tellingly, she was clutching a piece of tape in one hand, suggesting she had tried to remove it. Investigators noted indications that Sharron had attempted to stand up, implying she may have been left alive during part of the ordeal. Roughly 15 meters from her body, investigators found additional evidence: tire tracks and a trail of blood droplets leading to where she was left. There were no drag marks, suggesting Sharron had been carried from the car and abandoned in the snow. Her socks and shoes were clean, confirming she hadn't walked or crawled. A man's shirt was tied tightly around her wrists, and based on its position, investigators concluded the suspect was quite tall. A clear footprint near the gate post added further clues. Nearby, they also found the receipt for the Garrow jacket that Sharron had gone to pick up, but never received. The forensic report revealed that Sharron had died only a few hours before her body was found, confirming she had been held captive from Saturday until Tuesday. The killer had been extremely cruel. Marks on her neck showed signs of strangulation, and she had choked on her own blood. Her ribs were crushed, possibly from the killer kneeling on her chest. She had suffered a severe head injury and multiple stab wounds. Both sides of her jaw were broken. Her nose had been fractured, and her cheek had been torn by a tooth that had been knocked out during the attack. On April 4, 1975, about 200 friends, relatives, and local residents gathered at a community center, united in grief and hope that justice would soon be served. 9 months before Sharron's death, another tragic case had occurred in Canada: the killing of a young girl in Châteauguay. 12-year-old Norma O'Brien went missing on the evening of July 9, 1974. After leaving home to play water polo, she discovered the pool was closed for repairs. Norma then headed toward a nearby pond, but she never made it home. That same evening, her family reported her missing. Convinced that Norma wouldn't have disappeared willingly, her family began searching immediately. The next day, her partially clothed body was discovered in a field near the pool. Norma's case bore a striking resemblance to Sharron's. Both young girls were found in nearby areas, and both had suffered violent attacks. The two crime scenes were roughly a 30-minute drive apart, leading to speculation that the same person may have been responsible, although no concrete evidence has ever confirmed this theory. Not long after Sharron's case, another disturbing incident occurred. On June 23, 1975, 14-year-old Debbie Fisher disappeared in Châteauguay while riding her red bicycle home. Her body was later discovered in a wooded area. Although there were no signs of abuse of a sexual nature, the investigation determined she had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Eventually, a 17-year-old male was taken into custody and confessed to the crime. His identity has remained confidential due to his age. The individual stated that he had been returning home on his moped around 6:30 p.m. when he noticed Debbie riding her bike and carrying a bottle of milk. He admitted to formulating a harmful plan. After greeting her and receiving a kind response, he rode ahead, hid his moped in the bushes, and sat by the roadside pretending to cry. Out of concern, Debbie stopped to check on him. As she approached, he unexpectedly grabbed her and attacked. He then attempted to hide evidence of the incident and ultimately took her life by striking her with a rock. He placed her body in an abandoned vehicle nearby before fleeing the scene. During questioning, he also confessed to being responsible for Norma O'Brien's death, but he denied any involvement in Sharron's case. Authorities confirmed he had an alibi during the time of Sharron's disappearance, and therefore, he was not treated as a suspect. He was convicted in the two other cases, and due to his minor status at the time, served only a few years before being released. He now lives and works in Montreal, not far from where Sharron's body was discovered. Police investigating Sharron's case collected a large amount of evidence, but the results were discouraging. 13 months passed without identifying a lead suspect. Authorities reviewed 38 individuals who may have been linked to the night Sharron went missing. 6 of them were briefly detained, but ultimately released due to insufficient evidence. Sharron's close friends were also interviewed. Some had been at the pizzeria, others were home watching a hockey game. All had verifiable alibis. As the investigation stalled, momentum began to fade. Eventually, it seemed that everyone had moved on, everyone except Yvonne, Sharron's mother. Determined to find answers, Yvonne began to reconstruct the timeline. She knew that Sharron hadn't gone far from home. She was only walking to the local pizzeria. On her way, she was expected to cross paths with a neighbor who routinely took the same route home from work. For years, this neighbor had walked that same path. But on the day Sharron went missing, he claimed he hadn't seen her on the sidewalk. Since Sharron had only just left the house and hadn't traveled far, Yvonne believed the abduction must have occurred shortly after she said goodbye to a friend. The perpetrator had only a narrow window of time to act, and somehow did so without drawing attention. There were no known witnesses, no cries for help, and no immediate signs of a struggle. It was as if she had vanished without a trace, a disappearance that, to this day, feels disturbingly calculated. Sharron's mother believed it was crucial to pay attention to all the neighbors on their street. Someone should have noticed the suspicious stranger or recognized him if he lived nearby. Detectives described the killer and rapist as being around 20 years old, likely living with his parents. They suspected that he had psychological issues, possibly including obsessive behaviors or hostility towards women. The detectives believed this crime was not the first committed by the suspect, and if he wasn't apprehended soon, it wouldn't be the last. They were convinced that several people were involved in both the kidnapping and the subsequent violence. It was also thought that one of the attackers could have been an unpredictable stranger with a knife who initially targeted another girl, Cheryl, but fled when come across by nearby witnesses. Witnesses described the attacker after Cheryl's assault. Despite thorough searches, he could not be found. It was statistically unlikely for two rapists and kidnappers to be active at the same time in one of the city's safest neighborhoods. Prompting detectives concluded that the same person was responsible for the attack on Cheryl and the murder of Sharron. The attacker's behavior suggested he knew the area well, allowing him to navigate without leaving evidence or raising suspicion among residents. Detectives, along with Cheryl's mother, concluded that the assailant likely lived nearby. They characterized the attacker as a sadist. Typically, individuals with such tendencies follow a predictable pattern. They seek out compliant victims, initially presenting themselves as charming and sweet to gain trust. Over time, however, they become increasingly cruel and demanding. It all begins with control, followed by humiliation, and then they start mocking the victim. In this context, relationships with women often develop, and the sadist gradually shifts from seeking a partner to becoming a predator on the hunt. As a result, the police decided to thoroughly investigate all local residents with histories of harassment and domestic violence. Their goal was to find and question the knife-wielding attacker who had assaulted Cheryl. He matched the profile of the criminal, socially awkward and resorting to a knife instead of conversation. He was unlikely to be a successful individual or possess high intelligence. This type of person usually had a history of violence and preferred to use brute force to achieve his goals instead of clever tactics or deception. It was clear he lacked self-control, easily losing his temper and being ready to fight at any moment. The most alarming part of this situation is that the police are chasing a suspect who could be a serial killer, who needs to be stopped immediately. While he tried to run away from the detectives, they continued their search for him. Unfortunately, many crucial technologies we have today, such as DNA analysis, surveillance cameras, and phone geolocation, had not yet been developed at that time, leaving the investigators with limited resources. Although detectives investigated quickly and professionally, but 6 years after Sharron's body was found, the killer struck again. A 12-year-old girl named Temi was ferociously murdered. It is believed that the sadistic attacker, after assaulting a 16-year-old named Sharron, began targeting younger girls for his crimes. When Temi's body was discovered, it was revealed that the attacker had grabbed her and started to molest her. Then, he attempted to rape her, but was unsuccessful. In a fit of rage, he struck her on the head with a rock, leading to her death. Although detectives investigated quickly and professionally, but 6 years after Sharron's body was found, the killer struck again. The second victim was a 12-year-old schoolgirl named Temi Leakey. She was ferociously murdered. It is believed that after attacking 16-year-old Sharron, the perpetrator chose to target younger girls for his crimes. When Temmie's body was found, the same police officers who had been investigating Sharron's murder took on this case. They quickly noticed the similarities between the two murders, which further supported the theory of a serial killer. On March 20th, 1981, Temmie was visiting her grandmother when she disappeared just a few blocks from her grandmother's house. Later, Temmie's mother found her glasses on the sidewalk. When she returned home, the woman immediately reported her daughter missing to the police. They identified a witness who saw a man in a beige raincoat get out of a small red car and force a screaming girl into it. That same evening, Temmie was found barely alive on the street. A man came to the police station to report a serious matter. He had seen Temmie naked and partially covered with clothes. Doctors worked hard to save her, but unfortunately, she died. The examination revealed that she had been strangled. Although she was not raped, traces of male fluid were found on her clothes. The attacker had been careless, leaving behind enough evidence to connect this case to other brutal murders. Despite the detectives' efforts, the investigation reached a dead end. Meanwhile, in nearby areas of Canada, there were reports of similar assaults on girls and young women. In 1971, 17-year-old Lisa Blaze was found dead just a few meters from her home in Montreal. She had left a bar early in the morning, suffered a blow to the head, and was raped. This case remains unsolved. With so many open cases, the police struggled to determine whether they were related. In 2000, Sharron's mother reached out to the police, requesting a re-evaluation of her daughter's case using modern techniques. By then, advancements in technology, especially in DNA analysis, had made it possible to investigate such cases more effectively. However, just a week later, she was devastated to learn that most of the evidence from the year Sharron was murdered had disappeared. The few surviving items from 1995 included Sharron's clothing and belongings, possibly linked to a suspect. Forensic scientists tested a shirt belonging to a man, but found that the DNA did not match Sharron's. Although no matches were found in the database, the DNA sample was preserved for future comparisons with any suspects that might emerge later on. In June 2004, the police received a tip about a garage where Sharron might have been held by her killer. When detectives investigated, they found no new evidence. They collected 3 DNA samples from the site, but none matched Sharron's DNA or the materials found on her clothing. Ultimately, this lead turned out to be false. In 2012, a $10,000 reward was offered for information leading to the arrest of Sharron's killer. This announcement suggested that the police might have new leads and were seeking help from the public. They established a special hotline to make it easier for people to share information, and the investigation was reopened. However, like previous efforts, this initiative did not result in any breakthroughs. Detectives later revisited the case involving Cheryl's attack in hopes of identifying the perpetrator. They arranged for Cheryl to undergo hypnosis. During the session, she was shown photos of various men, including serial killer William Patrick Fife. She said her attacker looked very similar to William, a Canadian serial killer who was convicted of murdering 5 women in Montreal. He claimed to have had 9 victims, but authorities could only confirm 5. Detectives had long suspected his involvement in the murders of the girls and tried to link him to those cases. However, he denied any guilt and claimed he only started killing in 1979. It is important to note that Sharron was murdered in 1975. Regrettably, no evidence was ever found connecting him to Sharron's case. Later on, investigators explored potential connections between the girls' murders and other dangerous criminals in Canada. One suspect was Mike French, a member of the Montreal biker gang Satan's Choice. He had lived near Sharron at the time of her murder in 1975, but moved away with his parents 2 years later. Those who knew him described him as aggressive and cruel, suggesting he could have been responsible for the girls' deaths. Some witnesses even reported hearing Mike boast about his involvement in violent acts. However, once again, the police faced difficulties. Mike was killed in a gang conflict in November, taking with him any potential information about his connection to the murders. His own murder also remains unsolved. Ultimately, all these leads turned out to be nothing more than speculation. Sharron's family grew outraged by the police's lack of professionalism. They remained committed to fighting for justice until the end, determined to identify and hold the perpetrator accountable. Sharron's mother believed that the fight was not just for her daughter, but also for other parents mourning the loss of their children. In 2015, Sharron's mother appeared on television alongside 9 other families, accusing the police of being incapable of properly handling the case. A major development finally came in June 2022, when a match was found in a DNA database using genetic genealogy. A DNA sample from a man's shirt, discovered at the scene of Sharron's murder, was matched to Franklin Maywood Romine, who had died in 1982. His body was exhumed for analysis, and DNA confirmation was obtained on May 2, 2023. Franklin resembled the suspect described by witnesses. He had lived near the location where the attack occurred, and his car matched the tire tracks found close to Sharron's body. He also had a troubling criminal history, including convictions for assault and rape. This evidence proved crucial in finally solving Sharron's murder case. Although no one could be charged or prosecuted, investigators were at last able to bring closure. The tragic murder of Sharron Prior, a 16-year-old schoolgirl, was solved thanks to advancements in DNA testing and the tireless efforts of her family.